if mitzvahs betelis liasid lavai. This is a machlokes. Will the mitzvahs be reinstituted when we have Techiyas HaMesim? According to one Mandi Amar, once we have the world of resurrection, the Torah will no longer be obligatory. That's mitzvahs betelis liasid lavai. And according to the other opinion, the Torah will continue to be binding even in the Olam HaTechiyah. And the Gemara gave a nafkamina, are you allowed to put tachrichim of shatnez on a mace? Because when a person is dead, there are no averos that are being done. But when there'll be resurrection, he'll be wearing shatnez. So if I hold mitzvahs betelis liasid lavai, so there's no problem, because when he gets resurrected, there's no issur of shatnez on him. If, on the other hand, I hold, the Gemara says, mitzvahs lo betelis liasid lavai, so memela, I can't put tachrichim of shatnez on the mace because he may be resurrected wearing shatnez. So I had mentioned, the last thing I had talked about was a kasha that Taisus asks in Maseches Nida, and that is, even if mitzvahs betelis liasid lavai, why would it be mutter to put shatnez on a mace? Why do we not have the problem of layeg larash? Right, layeg larash, the Gemara in Brachos says that you're not supposed to put tefillin on within 4 amos of a mace. You're not supposed to wear your tzitzis out within 4 amos of a mace because you're making fun of a person that he's not able to do mitzvos, and that's layeg larash. Layeg larash meaning making fun of a poor person because he's poor, and a mace is poor in the sense that they are not able to do mitzvahs. So for carrot, if I put on shatnez on a mace, I'm telling the mace that, hey, you don't have mitzvahs, you don't have averos. Why is that not layeg larash? This is Taisus and Nidas kasha. So the Meshech Chachma gives a very, very interesting teretz. The Meshech Chachma says the following idea, that the issur of layeg larash only applies to positive mitzvos, mitzvos aseh. It does not apply to negative commandments, mitzvos lo sasa. So layeg larash is going to ask me to wear tefillin, show my tzitzis, according to some interpretations, learning Torah, even davening, unless you're 4 amos away from a kever. What's the chiluk? So he says like this. He says the chiluk is that a mitzvos aseh adds Kedusha to you. A lo saseh preserves the Kedusha you already have. So let's make up numbers just to illustrate this. Let's imagine you wake up in the morning with a Kedusha deposit of positive 10, whatever that means. I'm just making up a number. So every time I do a mitzvah saseh, I'm adding to my Kedusha. So I daven, I put on tefillin, so it goes 15, 20, 25, 30, depending on how well you do the mitzvah. A mitzvah saseh raises your madrega. Now, let's assume I've gone through the day and I have not murdered, I have not stolen. Right, I started off the day as a 10. And throughout the day, I have fulfilled many, many negative commandments. I didn't eat chazer. I didn't murder. So the Meshech Chachma says that doesn't raise my Kedusha level, meaning fakert. If I were to transgress a lo saseh, I would lose my Kedusha. But keeping a lo saseh does not add holiness to you. It simply maintains your existing status quo. Mitzvah saseh is meisif Kedusha. The fulfillment of a lo saseh is a maintenance of Kedusha. The violation of a lo saseh is a depletion of Kedusha. Now, the reason why a lo saseh depletes Kedusha is because you are rebelling against the will of God. Since a dead body is not chayiv in mitzvahs, when I put shatnez on a mace and I'm telling the dead body, I have an issur shatnez, you don't, that doesn't hurt the mace because the mace loses nothing. Bishlama, when I do a mitzvah saseh, I'm making fun of the mace because I can go up in Kedusha. I'm a 10 and I can go to a 12, a 15, a 20, a 30. That's mitzayir the mace because the mace is frozen at a 10. and I can go up to a 20. That's called layeg larash. Masha'in kain. If I don't wear shatnez because that would deplete my Kedusha, but the mace who wears shatnez does not deplete his Kedusha because it's not an Aveira, so there's nothing for him to be upset about. There's nothing he's losing. And therefore the Meshech Chochmah says, it's not shayach layeg larash on a negative commandment. It's only shayach layeg larash on a positive commandment. Now, l'maisa, I have to say that the Meshech Chochmah's teretz may be a good teretz for why I could put shatnez on a mace. But it's not really a good teretz for passeling the talis. I had mentioned the minhag was to passel the talis. There you're dealing with a mitzvah saseh, and you're showing the mace that he cannot do a mitzvah saseh. That would be a question. The Meshech Chochmah's teretz is not a teretz for a loisasa. Yeah. For tzitzis, rather.
I'm understanding this correctly. Is like this like loheg larash, is that like doche, your chiyuv of doing a positive mitzvah?
No, it's not doiche, but it just says you should do your positive mitzvah 4 amos away from the kever. For example, you wear tefillin, you wear your tefillin 4 amos away, meaning when you're in proximity, you don't do a positive mitzvah. Yeah. But you're not doing an aveira, you're just not doing a positive mitzvah in proximity to the mace, because that would be a source of humiliation and sar.
But in a case where, I'm not unsure what happened, like you can't do your mitzvah outside of that 4 amos, and you have a chiyuv of tefillin, say you have to do it right now.
So in all probability, in such a situation, you would do the mitzvah. In other words, we're not saying loig larash is not mevatel a mitzvah, but it tells you that don't do it here, do it somewhere else. Now, people do ask a kasha that there is a Gemara that says that if a person doesn't do an aveira, the Torah considers it as if they're actively doing a mitzvah. Avar adam v'lo asa aveira ki'ilu ki'e mitzvah. But I would say that only refers to things in which you have a powerful yetzer hara. Meaning, as I say, let's go back to the idea that I didn't murder somebody today. Now, is Hashem going to reward us after 120 years for all of the murders that we didn't commit? Again, for most people, maybe not all the time, but for most people, not murdering somebody is not something they actively struggle with. I hope not. I hope not, at least. Most of us, don't have this taiva to kill. So the Eibishter's not going to reward us necessarily because I didn't kill. But on the other hand, if I didn't speak lashon hara, where a person does have a very strong yetzer hara for the most part, so eino chinami. In other words, the statement that if a person fulfills a negative commandment, they get the reward of doing a mitzvah does not refer to every negative commandment. It only refers to the negative commandments that I struggle with, that I grapple with. Okay, it's hard to hear that I'm going to get reward for not killing, not raping, and even not even keeping kosher. If the pshat is that I'm not actively struggling with cheeseburgers or oysters, then it's hard to say that Hashem is going to give me reward because of that. The reward is on the struggle. So in terms of the lo sase itself, if you're over on the lo sase, it's paigay your Kedusha, but it's not meisif Kedusha, as opposed to a mitzvah saseh that is meisif Kedusha. Okay. Be it as it may, how did we get onto this? We got onto this because we were just discussing, as part of Torah Shebichsav, the non-changeability of the Torah, the immutability of the Torah. That is one of the Rambam's Yud Gimel Ikrei Amuna. And I just raised the question, how will the Rambam understand the machlokas in the Gemara if mitzvahs betelis the Asid Lavai, or mitzvahs are not betelis the Asid Lavai? How could mitzvahs be betelis the Asid Lavai if the Torah never changes and the Torah is eternal? So you'll recall I had mentioned to you the Maharal's teretz that mitzvahs betelis is only after Techiyas HaMesim, meaning Mashiach will not be Mavatel, but Techiyas HaMesim is like a new world. It's like a new creation totally. And therefore the rule that the Torah is eternal is only for this world. And Techiyas HaMesim already, which transcends death and creates new life, really has the status of a Bria Chadasha. And on that Bria Chadasha, there is a machlokas if the mitzvahs are going to be b'teilus. So you have to differentiate between Yemos HaMashiach and Techiyas HaMesim. Techiyas HaMesim is a later stage. We don't know exactly when, but it is after Yemos HaMashiach. I had suggested another answer, which is a little different, and that is the idea that mitzvahs will not exist by Techiyas HaMesim is not because the Torah is abrogated, but because once a person is patur from mitzvahs, a person does not get chayav in it again. In other words, the concept is a person dies. A person dies, they are patur. Once you're patur, you don't become chayav. So it's not that the Torah ceases to exist, but any person that is resurrected is not chayav in mitzvahs. And in Achinami, his next door neighbor, who happened to have been alive at the time of Techiyas HaMesim, will keep mitzvahs, because he never went to the level of being exempt. Mashenkin, like the Maral learns it's an olam chadash, so there's no Torah. I'm suggesting something a little different. It's not that there's no Torah, it's that people who were exempted don't become re-chayav. But anybody who didn't die, right? You happen to be alive at the time of Techiyas HaMesim, right? You happen to be alive, so you're not going to die, right? You're going to be chayav in mitzvahs because you never became patur from the mitzvahs. So that's a little different than the Maral. That's kind of focusing not on the Torah being abrogated, but on the person being exempt, and then you don't become re-chayav again. That's if I hold mitzvahs are b'teilus. If I hold mitzvahs are not b'teilus, then Chinami, all of those mitzvahs are still going to exist. Now, I had mentioned that Rav Yosef Albo did raise the question on the Rambam from Ben Zoma, who says that there will be no Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim Limos HaMashiach, and we talked about those answers. I won't repeat that. But now I want to mention another kasha Rav Yosef Albo asks. And he asks the kasha not so much from the mitzvah, but from the fact that the kesav of the Torah seems to have changed. And this is based on a Gemara in the second parak of Sanhedrin, where the Gemara says, originally the Torah was given in kesav ivri, and in the days of Ezra is the beginning of the Second Temple, in the days of Ezra, the Torah was changed to what we call Kesav Ashuris. Now, Kesav Ashuris is essentially the aleph base that we have, right? You look at a Sefer Torah. The Kesav in a Sefer Torah is called Kesav Ashuris. We'll discuss in a moment why it is called Kesav Ashuris. And the original Sefer Torah was not in Kesav Ashuris. It was in Kesav Ivri, the old Hebrew script. Now, we know what that would look like. We actually have inscriptions of that old Hebrew script. It was kind of like a hieroglyphic script, which is not used today at all. Right? So Rav Yosef Albo points out that the Torah itself was changed from Kesav Ivri to Kesav Ashuris. So how do we understand that idea of a change? So first, to really understand this, we have to know what we mean by Kesav Ashuris. Literally, Kesav Ashuris means Assyrian writing. And you'll sometimes hear somebody say to you, some Jewish studies professor or whatever it is, oh, you think your Torah is so holy? The letters you have in your Sefer Torah are simply the Assyrian alphabet. They're not even authentically Jewish. It's Kesav Ashuris, and they'll even quote the Gemara. But it's very, very clear, if you learn the Gemara, you see that this is not Assyrian alphabet. First of all, it's not the Assyrian alphabet. It isn't, because we know what the Assyrian alphabet was, and we know the Babylonian alphabet, and this was not that. Rather, when it calls it Ashuris, the Gemara is doing two things. First of all, it's conflating Babylonia and Assyria. We're not even talking about Assyria, we're talking about Babylonia. What happened was that Assyria was a world empire that was conquered by Bavel. Remember, Assyria exiled the 10 tribes. But then Nebuchadnezzar conquered Assyria, and Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. Now you do find in Tanakh that because Nebuchadnezzar's empire conquered Assyria, which was a very, very powerful empire, Nebuchadnezzar is sometimes called Ashur. So that's one thing to keep in mind, that when Chazal or even the Psukim talk about Ashur, they don't always mean Assyria, they mean Babylonia that took over the Assyrian Empire. Okay, so Ksav Ashuris would not mean Assyrian writing, it would mean Babylonian writing because it got revealed in Babylon. But it's not the Babylonian alphabet. Rather, here is the story. Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. And Nebuchadnezzar reigned for 45 years. He was succeeded by his son Avil Marudach. And Avil Marudach was succeeded by his son Belshazzar. Belshazzar had miscalculated when the 70 years of exile were supposed to be over. The Gemara in Megillah gives some complicated calculations we don't have to go into. And Belshazzar figured that the Jews were not going to be redeemed. So Belshazzar made a great celebration. He took all of the utensils of the Beis HaMikdash, as Achashverosh did later, because Achashverosh later made another erroneous calculation. But Belshazzar did it first. And he makes a big, big celebration with the kalim of the Beis HaMikdash. And in the middle of that celebration, there's a gigantic hand that comes out of the wall and inscribes 4 words on the wall. This is the source of the English expression, the handwriting on the wall, taken from the book of Daniel. And what did the handwriting on the wall say? It said 4 words in Kesav Ashuris, in our Aleph base, that nobody knew how to read. Even the Jews didn't know how to read, because our Aleph base had been Kesav Ivri. Minei, minei, tekalu parsin, Aramaic words. And Daniel was given a Ruach HaKodesh to be able to read those words. And those words were, minei, minei, your deed, talking to Belshazzar, your deeds have been counted. Tekal, they have been weighed. Uparsin, and your empire shall go to the Persians. Handwriting on the wall. Now you can imagine what type of scene that was. So what always strikes me is, right afterwards it says Belshazzar went to sleep. Shows you how confident a Russia is. Handwriting on the wall. I don't think I would have been able to sleep that night. But he went to sleep. And that night, in what was a bloodless coup except for him, he got killed by his own servants, and the Persian Empire, Persia, took over his malchus. And then you have the Purim story later, etc. So, when the Gemara talks about this new alphabet, it doesn't mean it was a Babylonian alphabet. It was revealed from Hashem in Bavel. So that's the first thing to know. In other words, there are 2 points I'm making about Kesav Ashuris. Kesav Ashuris does not mean Assyrian writing, but rather it means Babylonian writing, because Babylon took over Ashur. But my second point is, it doesn't mean the writing of the Babylonians, but it means the heavenly writing that Hashem revealed in Bavel. Now, the interesting question is, Minei Minei Takalu Parson is not the whole Aleph base. It's only some letters. So in a way that I don't fully understand, the Gemara does not fully explain, somehow that was a revelation of the whole Aleph base. Perhaps the way it looked was highlighted letters. I mean, perhaps it was like the whole Aleph base was on the wall, but the words, Minei Minei, were highlighted. Now, so those are 2 points to keep in mind, because people are going to mistranslate this. People will translate Ksav Ashuris as Assyrian alphabet. Number one, Assyria means Babylonia, and number two, it just means Hashem revealed it in Babylonia, not that it is a Babylonian alphabet. Now, Ezra is shortly after Daniel. And Ezra, who is given the status of like a Moshe Rabbeinu, decided, and we'll discuss how could he decide it, that'll be the big question, decided that Hashem's revelation of this special alphabet shows that it has a certain Kedusha. And from now on, the Gemara does say, Ezra changed the writing of Sefer Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzah, that it was no longer in Ksav Ivri, it was in Ksav Ashuris. So even with all of this explanation, you still have a real problem. Ezra changed the writing based on the prophetic revelation to Daniel. So granted, we've gotten rid of the academic argument that Ezra just took over a Babylonian alphabet. Okay, that's not the case. He took over what was heavenly revealed. But still, a Navi cannot change the Torah. How could he change that? So the Gemara itself asks the kasha. The Gemara itself says, how could Ezra be Mishana? A Navi is not allowed to change anything. So the Gemara's answer is that there was a drasha that implied there would be a change. The Torah describes, well, actually, he's talking about the book of Devarim, but in effect, Chazal darshan for the whole Torah, Mishnah HaTorah. Remember, Mishnah HaTorah means the repetition of the Torah, but Mishnah can also mean changing, shinoi. Mishnah HaTorah, the Torah is merames. There will be a future time in which the writing of the Torah is going to be changed. Now, the Torah didn't say when that time would be. So that's where Ezra comes in and says, the Giloi of Ksav Ashuris, of this special Ksav, is the Siman Min HaShamayim. That now it is time to apply the rule of Mishnah HaTorah. So this is not a Navi contradicting the Torah. Mishnah HaTorah is the authorization for a shinoi of the Ksav. If the Torah itself says there will come a time, then a Navi is not contradicting the Torah by using Nevuah to determine that this is the time. Okay? So this is actually just Pashut Pshat. Again, I say this because I do know from experience that you will have either professors or graduate students or people who will try to bring up this foreign writing thing. So it's important to understand the context of the passage itself, just Pashut Pshat of the passage. Yeah.
Wasn't the first tablets written in...
Right, so I'll get to this. I'll get to this now. So now, here is a kasha that Taisus asks. Rav Chisda says in Maseches Megillah, some of you may have learned Maseches Megillah, that the luchais that Moshe Rabbeinu brought down, the letters went all the way through. Right? The Anochi, all the way through. Now, the miracle was that even though the letters went all the way through, you could read the words from both sides. Now, that is a miracle, because normally if you engrave letters, when you're on the other side of it, you see the word backwards. So if I'm looking at the front and I see Anochi, and the letters go all the way through, and I'm on the other side of the tablets, and I see Anochi. That's miracle number one. That you could read it on both sides, and it didn't look backwards. Miracle number two, Rav Chisda says, is the letters, the final mem and the samach. Because how is that so? Again, you have to imagine the letters. Every engraved letter can be engraved all the way through without any pieces falling out because everything is connected. But take a final mem, a final or samach. That you draw a circle, right? A circle or a square. So that piece in the middle, like the thing that fills up the whole of a donut. This is the opposite of a donut. Here you have vacant space with a solid piece in the middle. That solid piece is not connected to anything. So what keeps that solid piece in the air? Answer, miracle. Final mem and final samach. The middle part could only be their benes. There was nothing connecting it. That's Rav Chisda in Maseches Megillah. So Frek Taisus Akasha. But wait a second. If the first luchais, if the luchais and the Torah were given in Kesav Ivri, you don't have that problem. Again, just trust Taisus. If you look at the alphabet of Kesav Ivri, there is no piece that's disconnected. So there's a stira. On one hand, you're telling me the luchos and the Torah was given in Kesav Ivri, and it was only changed in the days of Ezra. And then you tell me the final mem in the samach, the middle piece was benes. That only works if it's Kesav Ashuris. So which was it? So here is what you said. We have a teretz from the Radvaz. The Radvaz is Rav David ben Zimra. He was, in the time of the Beis Yosef, he was actually the Rabbi of the Arizal. A Rabbi both in Nigla and even in Kabbalah. The Ari actually had a Rabbi in Kabbalah at a very young age. And the Radvaz gives a beautiful answer. He says that there's a difference between the first luchais and the second luchais. Because the truth of the matter is, Kesav Ashuris is the holy language, is the holy letters. So it's very fair to say Hashem gave the Torah in Kesav Ivri and it got changed to Ashuris. So he says like this, he says, the original luchais that Moshe was going to come down with were Kesav Ashuris. But what happened when Moshe comes down on the 17th of Tammuz? Right, the 17th of Tammuz. And he sees the Egel. So what do Chazal actually say? The letters flew away. Whatever that means with engraving. I mean, the truth of the matter is the whole picture. You can talk about ink. I mean, even that's a nace. You can talk about ink flying away. Engraving technically cannot fly away because it's not superimposed, but whatever it is, the letters disappeared. And the Jewish people never saw the first luchais. They never saw the first luchais. But the first, and that's why years later, with the Kesav Ashuris, nobody recognized it. And the second luchais, and the Sifrei Torah, and the Tefillin, and the Mezuzahs, were all written in Kesav Ivri until the revelation of the handwriting on the wall in the days of Daniel, in which Ezra reinstituted the Kesav Ashuris. So now it's no stira. The mem and samach sheba luchais b'nei sayuim den is the luchos rishonos, and we didn't know. We weren't aware of that miracle. We were not aware of it, but it was a miracle. But the luchais shniyos and the Sefer Torah and the Tefillin and the Mezuzah until Ezra's time were all in Kesav Ivri. And it's only in Ezra's time, or Daniel's time, and then followed by Ezra, that we were zeicha to get back the Kesav Ashuris that we lost at the time of the Chet HaEgel. Now the Radvaz then adds a beautiful point. Why did we get it back in Ezra's time? What was so special about that time that we merit to get back this holy Ksav that was always holier than Ksav Ivri. So the Ravad says beautifully, we lost Ksav Ashuris because of the Chet Egel, which was a Chet of Avodah Zarah. At the beginning of the Bayis Sheni, the Anshe Knesset Agdola fasted for 3 days so that Hashem should take away the Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah, which is an extraordinary thing, because the one thing Hashem does not want to take away is free will. But apparently the Yetzer of Avodah Zarah was so powerful that we actually asked Hashem, take it away from us. And it was taken away from us. Memela, the Radvad says, if we lost Kesav Ashuris because of the Chet of Avodah Zarah, as soon as the Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah is taken away, we can get back Kesav Ashuris, because we no longer have the Aveira that's monea us from a connection to that Kesav. Now, this is a whole talk in and of itself, because it's brought down that when we lost the Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah, we also lost prophecy. They came the same time. The spirituals, because again, the origin of Avodah Zarah, the Rambam writes, is not crass or evil. The origin of Avodah Zarah is you are so overwhelmed with the presence of the greatness of God that you feel you can only worship an intermediary, you can't worship Hashem directly. And it's precisely that sense of awe that gives rise to prophecy. So Hashem took away that awe because it led to idolatry. But it's kind of like a lobotomy. By losing that awe, we lose the capacity for prophecy as well. So there's a cost, right? Just like, you say somebody has seizures, so you cut into the brain, or whatever it is. So you may get rid of the seizures, but you may get rid of some other good things as well, because they're all connected. Everything is interconnected. What do they say? There's even correlations between artistic creativity and depression, which is an interesting phenomenon, and that is, you treat the depression, a person loses the creativity, right? You have to figure out, what's better, to be a depressed creative artist or to be a happy mediocrity, I guess, okay, one has to debate. But the point basically is the things in the human personality are very linked. And paradoxically, the Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah is correlated to the gift of prophecy, and that's why the two left the world at the same time. Yeah.
I was wondering, there's just one in the Gemara where Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu that Rabbi Akiva is going to darshan many things from the crown of the letters. Is that referring to Kesav Ashuris? Right.
So that's a very good. Yeah, that actually is a very good kasha as well. Because l'chayra, if the Kesava, it's talking about Kesav Ashuris for sure, because you don't have crowns on Kesav Ivri. So you might want to say that that's maybe why, well, without the Radvaz, you can say, well, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know those drushes because Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have those letters. But like the Radvaz, Moshe Rabbeinu did have those letters. But he still, Rabbi Akiva is teaching him Chidushim. In other words, the idea basically is there that Hashem gave Moshe all of the foundations, but the particular drushes can come with the chidushim of people later. So it's all based on Moshe, but Moshe himself did not draw out all of those implications. Okay, so that's the issue of Kesav Ashuris, and those were essentially, just to summarize, those were essentially the two questions Rav Albo had on the Rambam's rule of the non-changeability of the Torah. One is the mitzvah of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim according to Ben Zoma, which will be abrogated Limota Mashiach, and the other is the Shinoi of the writing of the Torah, which happened in the days of Ezra, and the Rambam would have an answer to all of them. Right, with the Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, we gave some answers yesterday. And in terms of the Shinoi, the shinoi is built of the ksav. The shinoi is built into the Torah itself with the words Mishnah HaTorah, that it's a ksav that is going to be nishtana. And even the shinoi is not really a shinoi, it's bringing it back to what it originally was. Okay, the luchos rishonos were in Kisav Ashuris. Okay, so that kind of finishes the Torah Shebichsav unit. What I'm thinking of doing maybe next week, again, as we're approaching the end of the Rambam Sakdama generally, but I thought maybe we'll go over, just to know, the 13 midos of Rabbi Ishmael. It's in the Cedar actually, and just to kind of understand what they all are. I mean, the first two people know, Kal v'chomer, Gezer Shava. Once you get past number 2, though, it gets a little bit more murky. So maybe we'll go over them for a few days. Okay.